Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
This week, our celebration of Immigrant Heritage Month continues with stories of migration, tradition, and identity.
I think we need to get to a point where immigration identity is part of the American identity as a whole and is accepted as such. I know we use the word minority a lot to represent the immigrant experience, but I want to envision a future where we're not using the word minority anymore, where everyone is accepted as kind of an equal.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani, and this is Only in America. So last week, we launched Immigrant Heritage Month by looking at the data around immigration and American identity, and listening to some of the stories behind the numbers. This week, we're going to revisit some of those guests, but we're also going to talk to some new ones to hear more about their heritage and how it informs their sense of being American. We're going to start with Eric Kwak in Oakland, California. Eric came to the U.S. from South Korea with his family as a child.
One of the most vivid memories is actually driving down itself. I remember we arrived in Canada and we stayed at a smaller hotel with some other people who looked like they were college students, and I think they were trying to immigrate to the US as well. And so we got, I think, in like a Jeep in the middle of the night, and then we drove down. I think that was from Vancouver to Seattle, how I understand it. And then we eventually got on a flight from Seattle to Los Angeles. And being a young kid coming to the United States for the first time, I think I remember just being a little bit shocked, surprised, and a little bit awestruck in how things were different. Didn't really know what to expect at that age. I knew that we were moving far away, but I didn't know what that really meant at that age. But I eventually picked it up that, we were in a new country, we had to learn a new language, and yeah, that's how it eventually came to be.
That culture shock is something many immigrants describe as their first impression of America. For Edilsa Lopez, who we first heard from last week, it was a major part of her first years in the U.S. after moving from Guatemala.
It was a major shocking worldview because I came from a very small village where we didn't even have TV there. And, it was like a small village within a volcano kind of thing. Because I actually come from an indigenous roots. So my background is indigenous, and like everyone there is like dressed in indigenous clothes, and we live in a small village, it's not like a city or anything like that. So when I came to the US and I saw that, it was really a big shock for me because it was the first time that I learned about slavery or about there's other countries, and like there's Bosnia and Russia that I had no idea, and most of them had refugee stories. So I heard back in the time there was like a Bosnia genocide. I believe it was like during a time, and all the kids from there were in that high school, and they would share their stories, and it was just wow, we were all the same. So it was definitely like a major I guess a worldview for me, but at the same time I think that we were we united with the same story, so it was kind of like homey.
Now, Eric also developed a sense of community in his new home.
We eventually moved out to Koreatown, which was easier for my family, for my parents, because it's an ethnic enclave. And I grew up in Koreatown all my childhood, since I moved to the United States until graduating high school. That's basically my community. That's where I made my friends. That's where I grew up. That's where I kind of roamed the streets, going to places, going to play basketball, going to restaurants, going to watch movies. And I don't know if you're familiar with Koreatown, but it's very obvious that it's an ethnic enclave. Most of the stores there are in Korean. A lot of the people there are Korean, and Latinx. But Yeah, Koreatown is a place of comfort for me. It's a place that I'm familiar with. It's a place that if I know that if I visit, it's gonna feel that um, like a community to me, like a place where I belong.
However, growing up undocumented meant living with constant uncertainty. So when Eric became a DACA recipient in college, the impact was huge.
DACA itself was life changing for me. I think with that's like just like many other people. I got DACA when I was in college, sophomore year. So I think that was one of the most fortunate things to have happened to me. That was before I could work, so I wasn't looking for a job and being turned away because I didn't have work authorization. Sophomore year, got DACA was one of the greatest news of my life, and eventually I started working through work study, and that just gave me a path forward. Just the mindset as well that I can continue this education and eventually land somewhere where I can be financially sustainable and provide for my family um, and stuff like that. For as long as I've been, I was following the immigration legislations, and every time it was struck down, the Dream Act. I think it was introduced in 2001, but it always kept getting struck down, as is now, 20 years later. So I mean that shows how much of a standstill we're at in terms of passing any meaningful immigration legislation. But that was a big life changing moment for me. And I work in managing a grant for the Oakland Unified School District. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm financially stable enough to not worry too much about my finances. And I enjoy the work I do every day, which is to provide students with resources and opportunities to succeed. Yeah, contrary to what I've been hearing from people that have gone into the private industry where they feel burnt out, they feel that they don't know what they're doing, why they're doing this. They were kind of guided towards it by external factors, and I think I'm fortunate to be in a field that I want to be in.
Now, Eric says his experiences growing up were a major part of his later career decisions and desire to serve his community.
I think when I went into college, I didn't have the luxury of thinking about anything else but making money because that was kind of a necessity. That was what we had gotten into education for. That was why um, my parents had taught me education was important because we needed to be able to make enough money to be able to provide for ourselves comfortably. We didn't want to suffer from poverty, from fighting about money, from the bickering and like the stress that comes with not having enough money. So that was kind of a luxury I couldn't afford. Um, but as I went through college, um, um, I realized that um, I have built this sort of empathy through my life experience to people who are suffering, and um, I thought to myself that that's probably the best thing I can work for to help people relieve that stress and suffering, and the best way I can use my time, and that's the best way I will be fulfilled in terms of my emotions, my spirit. So that was kind of the switch for me.
Jessica Astudillo, who spoke about her Ecuadorian heritage last week, told us that that background was beneficial in her career as a physician.
My mom and my dad have both become more acculturated as the longer that they spend here, so they don't actually practice much traditions that they used to. But a couple of things though that have helped me understand a little bit more in the context of healthcare have been burning eucalyptus tea leaves to get rid of sort of like bad energies, but also, say for example, somebody has a cold or they're down with the flu, burning a little bit of that will help cleanse out the virus. And so that's something that my parents will still occasionally do, but they definitely did it a lot more when we were kids. But it does help me understand more about that perspective. If a family member comes in and says, my kid is sick, we've been doing this, it definitely helps me connect and understand with them.
The centrality of family and passing on traditions is something that Edilsa has taken to heart, especially since becoming a mother to her young daughter.
I would say definitely by showing my like values and my traditions and expose her to as much experiences as I can. That's how I would love for her to grow. And obviously, every single day, I teach her anything that I remember in regards to my own roots and traditions and values that I know because so many things has been forgotten already, and I want her to remember that and not to lose that.
Edilsa also hopes her own story of coming to the U.S. and the struggles that she faced will hold meaning for her daughter.
I would say whenever she's a little bit older, I will definitely share when she understands more about like kind of like who we are and especially who she is and who her mom is. And I definitely have to teach her about. I always say about just the amount of privilege that she has now to be a U.S. citizen, and then but not to forget about her family and where they came from, and how they came from because it wasn't easy.
And it's a struggle that Eric saw his own parents go through.
When I was in Korea, when we were before we were about to immigrate, my mom enrolled me in a class to take English class at the school, um, and at the time, I didn't really understand what my parents' mindset was, process was. Of course, they were trying to prepare me for America, but I didn't really understand the seriousness and the direness and the intent that my mom had. Um, so, not really knowing that and being really just like a shy kid, um, I used to go to the front of the classroom and not go in the door and just stay out for like a few weeks. And then my mom eventually found out that I was ditching class, which I didn't mean to. I was just shy for no reason at that time, I think. But uh, when I came home one day and my parents had found out, or my mom had found out, um, and I told her that I did attend class, and I lied to her. Is when she got really upset. And she brought out what's called a wachori, which is basically a hitting stick, just like a stick on your calves. I know the corporal punishment is not good, but kind of that moment is something that I will forever remember because that's really when I understood my parents' anxiety, nervousness, worry about the future of immigrating to the United States and how serious I should take this experience coming to America. And that's kind of, I think, set up my mindset for when I came here and how kind of hard I needed to work. I think it's been tough on us, definitely. One of the best things that have happened during COVID is that we were able to buy a condo for my parents through DACA actually. So DACA gave me the opportunity to get the social security number and to be able to buy a condo, which has been a dream of my mom for a while now, and she's been saving a lot of money to be able to do so. So we were able to do that, I think, towards like September. So that was a really bright spot for us, in despite everything that's been going on. Yeah, so I think that's been able to give us some sort of stability.
Farah Larrieux, an immigrant from Haiti, also talked about the strengths of her heritage.
Absolutely. I've not lost anything about my identity, who I am, where I come from. And particularly, as I mentioned earlier, the education, the respect, respect for myself, respect for others, the sense of sharing. Um, for instance, and this is, I'm going to give you an example. I realized that when Americans sending you an email and they go straight to what they're telling you, hey Farah, this is Cathy, and da, 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 da. And you go straight to the point. But Haitian we won't do that. We say, hey Cathy, how you doing? How's your day? How's the family? We ask you this question. So we ask you a question about your well-being, and then we will say, Hey, I need you. We want to, we'd like to do a podcast with you. So we're kind of slow in where we're going. And every day I can tell you, I have to kind of jungle um, in this culture. So I have to, if I'm sending an email to an American, I have to go straight to the point. And then after that, I'm gonna say, "Hey, how you doing? Have a good day." And if I do that to a Haitian, it's like it's a big no no. Oh, you would? You didn't ask me how I am before you ask your question. So
Yeah.
Farah also addressed some of the misunderstandings about her own heritage and identity and what she wished more Americans understood about her culture.
I know that it can be controversial, but I think it's interesting for people to know that voodoo, it's not about only negativity. It's not about killing people. It's not about evil things. Because voodoo has been portrayed like that in the movies, in the documentaries, in the American Hollywood movies, and then that's a misperception about voodoo. I know what I'm saying can be controversial because some people will say, no, 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 she's not telling the truth. But it is, you have to learn what voodoo is about. And I have to also to disclose that I am Catholic, but when I was being raised in Haiti, there was this two side of voodoo that you could see because I went to Catholic schools all my life, and then in Catholic school they were portraying you voodoo as very bad. But the thing is, hey, side of my family are from the countryside of Haiti. And these people, they have their ritual. They still, cultivate and preserving their history, their voodoo heritage. And it's about a community. It's about coming together. It's about unity. Even we have, I can say that maybe Asian tend to have lost the sense of unity. But remember that for the slave in Haiti and history report, and for the slave to get organized and to start the movement, the revolt, the evolution, it was through voodoo, to the ceremony of Boakaima, and it's important for people to understand that voodoo, it's not a negative thing, as any other religion, and as anything in life, it's always two sides, good against evil. And voodoo is also the same thing, the same religion. And I encourage your viewers to learn more about voodoo and to start presenting voodoo as evil. It's not true, and this has to be also based, based on the legacy of colonialism, that I think the misinformation about voodoo it crossed the years, and then that's why people still thinking that way. But now with the power of technology, so we can do our research and establish the truth about voodoo, and like any other religion, Hinduism, Muslim, and Judaism, voodoo is the same, and Catholicism, and we have to respect that.
As much as Immigrant Heritage Month is an occasion of celebration and joy, it's also an opportunity to remember how much more work there is to be done. Because we often hear the U.S. described as a nation of immigrants, a phrase that does indeed capture the ways immigration has defined and inspired American identity, but it's also a phrase that can obscure other aspects of America's history, aspects that we still feel the impact of today. When celebrating a nation of immigrants, it's important to acknowledge what's left out of that narrative. For example, America's indigenous communities and its legacy of forced migration under the slave trade. It's also important to remember that our immigration laws themselves have a history of racism that is still felt today.
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up with racial inequality. I went to a school that was in high school. I went to the Los Angeles Unified School District, and I was bussed out in middle school because the home school I was supposed to go to had a reputation for teachers not caring enough, and pretty bad test scorings. So I was bussed out to a school an hour and a half away, which was predominantly white, which was when I kind of began to understand that that racial inequity in America. Um, a lot of microaggressions, racism directed towards Asian American students, because we are a minority. Even among the minority, I think in the school we're like only 2-3% of the population, so it's easy to pick on Asian students. They have a lot of stereotypes that are easy to bully around in middle school, being nerds, being not physically, big and stuff like that. So it's kind of when I came to an understanding of how people view race in America. And then that eventually evolved middle school, high school, and college. And I realized that uh, this is something that's not tolerable. We can live much better than this. And I want to work for that. And that's how I landed in Chicago eventually.
But as a TPS recipient, it is important for me to inspire those who are afraid to speak up, those who are on the table because of their immigration status, those who feel like, well, because I'm undocumented or because I have TPS or because I have DACA, uh, I have no rights. I have no voice. I'm helpless. And for me, it's important to show to these people that, hey, listen, um, even you undocumented, even you're a DACA recipient, a TPS recipient, you're not alone, and you have rights. You have your human basic rights, because people tend to forget that. People tend to think that because someone is undocumented, oh, well, you have no rights, and they are victim of abuse. They are victim of all type of discrimination, and it's unfortunate. And United States has been a beacon for hope and the land of opportunities, the land of immigrants. But I get to a point to ask myself, is it really the land of immigrants, or what type of immigrants? And that's a conversation also that is important for me to ask ourselves. If I'm Black, I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Africa, or I'm from Asia, or I'm from the Middle East, is it the same opportunity for the immigrant that come from Europe or Canada? Or if I'm coming from Latin America, do we have the same rights as the same opportunities, or are we being welcomed the same way?
Edilsa sees her immigrant heritage as a way to address some of the inequality and discrimination that certain immigrant groups, particularly those from indigenous communities, face.
I can describe myself as like indigenous American person, because I just think, like, America is just kind of like one place in like Central America and then like North America, but like I have indigenous roots and indigenous backgrounds, and a lot of my growth and all my experiences come from indigenous roots, uh, and my values also. But a lot of my life has been spent here in the United States, that I feel like I already know all the American values, and my dreams and my everything related to the United States is kind of like getting very rooted here. Like, 'cause I've lived more of my life in the United States than in Central America, in like Guatemala. But I never forget about like my values and kind of where I come from. So I think I just identify myself as like indigenous American. Um, and I will always identify like that. And then when my daughter grows up, I'll definitely, mostly, I think I want to teach her about, like indigenous, what does the indigenous community is, and like where we come from and who we are and our traditions. Because I remember that growing up, my mom never taught me anything about indigenous because she was so ashamed of the indigenous community, and the reason is because the indigenous community is very oppressed and looked down also in Guatemala. And she just never liked that I like anything indigenous, like indigenous clothes. Like I wanted to wear indigenous clothes, not even the indigenous language at all. And literally, I showed her a documentary about like the indigenous community, and like, and she just, her perspective just changed. And this literally happened like probably like a few months ago, when she came to a realization that she was proud to be of an indigenous background, because before she hated it. So she never really taught me or said, let embrace it. She was just like, no, I don't wear these colors, or don't do that, and I just didn't understand why she was just so ashamed of that. Um, so I hope that I do different with my daughter, and that I teach her things like like little words, or like the clothes, like I said, or that she goes back and like learns from on her own, kind of like the culture and everything. When you come to the United States, everything is so different. We have so many limitations as far as what we can do, our celebrations, our traditions, uh, like there's so many limitations, so it's really hard to continue. But obviously the things that we do at home, we always stay. And things like food, or your own values, your own habits, they always stay. But I would say that I have for sure forgotten in a lot of the things that I used to do um, when I came to the United States. But I will say for sure that there's so many things that I also changed around me, like in my culture, like let's say a church, or with my friends, or with my school, or any school project. Like I would love to bring up always my like ethnic background and what I'm proud of. So, for example, like I always like a church, even though I go into a mostly like a white church, the theme of worship is not the same, but I always bring up my own like own way of being. And if there's any like potluck or anything related to that, like I will always bring up my culture. Like I'm proud of it, so I want to show it, and I don't want to forget it. um or when I'm doing social media, anything related to that, like my mom and I do some like cooking. Like we love to cook, and we have a lot of like indigenous kind of recipes, and we love to share them with other people. Why? Because I don't want to forget that.
So, how do we not just celebrate our immigrant heritage, but emphasize its centrality to our Americanness? How do we drive home that the vitality of American culture and identity exists not despite immigrant communities, but because of them?
I think we need to get to a point where immigration identity is part of the American identity as a whole, and is accepted as such. I know we use the word minority a lot to represent the immigrant experience, but I want to envision a future where we're not using the word minority anymore, where everyone is accepted as kind of an equal. Um, yeah, and I mean, being in education, I think part of the solution I want to just add here is ethnic studies. I think um, the education as an institution is one of the greatest tools to be able to, um, I think, move our country towards a more like progressive state, and teaching ethnic studies in the classroom, I think, gives students kind of an awareness of what each of our immigrant communities face, whether that's Korean American, Chinese American, Mexican American, Guatemalan American. We're similar in that we came to a new country and we are looking to live a better life, but we all have different cultural backgrounds to be celebrated. And I think once people understand that, at that level, in terms of trying to understand where we're coming from instead of what we see in the media, because that's not directly representative of who we are, I think then we can get to a place where the immigrant identity is being accepted more as part of the American identity.
Oh yeah, I absolutely think that the identities are so intertwined. It's impossible to separate one from the other. I mean, as many people will say, America was built on immigrants. They are the backbone of this country, and my parents are now citizens, but they started off as immigrants. They came here with a dream to make a better future for themselves and their children. And so I think it's so intertwined into your identity as an American. It's really hard to separate. And even now you have, especially during COVID, you start realizing that, the essential workers, those who work in the restaurant business, those who do farm labor, a lot of them are undocumented, or, if they're not, they're immigrants. And so, we depend on them so much to really fuel this country. And sometimes we kind of forget that and don't give that enough credit. So yes, I do strongly believe that the immigrant identity is very much intertwined with being an American. Whether, you are a child of immigrants now, or you were a child of immigrants decades ago, centuries ago, when, the first settlers came from, it's an undeniable part of that.
Our guests today have been Jessica Astudillo, Eric Kwak, Farah Larrieux, and Edilsa Lopez. You can read more about each of this week's guests on our website, immigrationforum.org/podcast. Only in America is going to take a short break for the next few weeks, but we're going to be back soon. If you like what you hear, subscribe to Only in America wherever you are listening to this episode. Only in America is produced and edited by Katie Lutz, Joanna Taylor, and Becca Wall. Artwork and graphics are designed by Carla Leja. Me, I'm Ali Narani, and I will talk to you next week.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and strengthening international peace and security. And from Humanity United. When humanity is united, we can bring a powerful force for human dignity.